Good morning, all. This is the Texas freeze kind of damage we're seeing on these boat engines from not being winterized. I wanted to show this. This guy had this engine was rebuilt. Didn't look like it had many hours on it at all. I'm not sure the customer knew it was rebuilt. May have bought the boat with it like that. But look at the extent of this freeze damage. This is so critical to winterize your watercraft. And look at that. I mean, that thing is just buckled and blown out of there. You know, I'm a Chevrolet fan, but I'm not really a fan of Chevrolet's deep cup freeze plugs. They have a tendency to not want to push out on a freeze. Unlike the Fords will push out, but we've got a Ford here too with a crack block, just not as severe. And of course, it's not usable. You have to throw the block away. You know, but ultimately, the Ford blocks seem to hold up better on a freeze, and the Chevrolets don't. We've had some extreme weather, you know, in the teens, in the low teens, and I think one night was about 9 degrees or something. Single digit, cold for Texas, and that's cold for us, you know, people down here in the South. But this is a rebuilt engine, and I'm finding that all the nuts and bolts, while I'm tearing this down, all the nuts and bolts on this thing are pretty loose, and it just shows you that whoever put this thing together initially just didn't do a really good job. Can't say anything about the rebuilder because everything looks to be like it's supposed to be. It's a roller cam engine with a one-piece rear seal. And but I find things like this. I go to take the oil pump off and I see this nasty looking stuff around here. See that? That's some type of sealer that somebody put on. It looks like it may even be silicone that they put on the oil pump flange face. Well, you don't want to do that, man. That thing should just go metal to metal. I mean, if you had a perfect little gasket, okay, but you know, we've put them together without gaskets for years. You want to make sure the surface isn't damaged where the pump face meets that. Let me get this pump lifted up. You know, if you got a brand new oil pump, the face shouldn't be damaged, right? So that should be a nice, clean, flat face, and you want to make sure that there's no damage around this face carefully. You could even remove these dowel pins if you wanted and lay a straight edge on there, or, you know, gently sand it with like a knife sharpened block or a piece of steel and some sandpaper, but you'd have to do that with the engine torn apart, otherwise you'd get material into the oil galleys. Now, if this stuff comes off of here, when you put it together, I mean, if it's hanging over the outside, you know it's hanging over the inside too. See that? And if that stuff goes down inside of an oil passage and partially blocks something, it's going to eat a bearing up quick. There's going to be a lot of damage. It's a possibility that the crank and rods and bearings on this engine are good, but of course the pistons, you know, they're not reusable. We would never reuse pistons like that. Set this down here. Let me pause this and roll this motor over, and I'll show you something else on it. Okay, we've rolled the engine over, and this was a roller cam motor. It's got an aftermarket timing chain, you know, but it's okay. It's got normal play in it for a little run time. It's pretty clean right in the top side, but you can see, you know, cracking occurred up in here and water. I see rust there, and I'm sure if we were to Magnaflux that, we'd see that crack real clear. May not show up well in the phone. But typically they'll crack up inside of here real bad, you know. They'll crack along here and on both sides. This one busted out on the sides of the block. Like I said, this side, severely. Let's look at this other side. And this side is split open right there. Okay? But what we did notice otherwise was the engine's been bored 40 over, which isn't going to hurt nothing. It says 040 on those pistons. But if you look at it, you got 2 of those pistons are nice, brand new, shiny, and 2 are dark that have been running rich on fuel. And you come to this side, and all of these look adequate, a little heavy on fuel. You know, this one's just oily from us flipping the engine around. So these 2 cylinders weren't even firing. These 2 clean pistons weren't firing. I don't know how long they weren't firing, but could be some water in the bore by the scratching. Could have been getting some water up inside of there. Could be a bad manifold. Could be a number of things. But that's a really clean piston. I mean, that thing looks like it wasn't firing since the day it was installed. And this one looks like it fired for a little bit and then just quit firing altogether. So I just wonder how long this engine's been running on 6 cylinders, since it's a V8. and the customer just didn't know it. You know, from not running your boat a lot, you don't really get familiar with it, and it's hard to determine, you know, if it's running right or not. But man, this thing was running on 6 cylinders for quite some time. So we're going to change this engine block out. We've got one, a good one, that's standard bore. We're going to bore it 20 over, and we're going to put new bearings and gaskets. We're going to do a valve job to the heads. You know, we're going to do a nice clean job of it, but the crankshaft and stuff out of the other engine is in perfect condition, and so are the connecting rods out of the other one. The other engine had burned a piston. This is going to be LT1 from here on out, which is pretty cool. And here's the crankshaft out of it. There's a couple of V6s there we're doing in the background, but that's the crankshaft out of the LT1, and it's nice and clean. We'll do a micro polish on it with some really fine emery cloth, give it a good bath, and we'll get it together. Oh, as soon as we're done with that little V6 over there, we're going to get right on this one. I just thought I'd show everybody what the freeze damage here in Texas can do to your boat motor. So it's very important to winterize them.